Hell's Angel shocked to see poor women and triplets begging on the street, unaware they're— The rumble of Hank's Harley echoed off the brick buildings as he cruised down Main Street. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the pavement. After decades on the road, most towns looked the same to him. Just another place to pass through, another memory to forget. His weathered hands gripped the handlebars, the leather of his riding gloves creaking with each subtle adjustment. The wind whipped at his gray-streaked beard and the patches on his worn leather jacket, remnants of a life he'd left behind but couldn't quite shake. That's when he saw them. On the sidewalk ahead, a woman sat cross-legged with 3 small boys huddled close to her. They all had the same mop of dark hair and identical tired faces. Triplets, Hank realized. Their clothes were clean but worn, and a cardboard sign propped against a paper cup told their story in simple black marker. Hungry and homeless. Anything helps. Hank's throat tightened. He'd seen plenty of people down on their luck over the years, had learned to look past them, to keep his eyes on the road ahead. But something about these kids struck him hard. Maybe it was how they sat so still, so quiet. No playing, no fidgeting. Just 3 pairs of eyes staring at the passing traffic with a weariness no 6-year-old should know. The woman kept her head down, one arm wrapped protectively around the boy in the middle. Her dark hair fell forward, hiding her face. The other 2 boys leaned against her sides, their small shoulders pressed together like they were trying to share what little warmth they had. Hank's hand moved to the throttle, ready to drive past like he always did. It wasn't his problem. He'd spent his whole life making problems, not solving them. But his bike slowed anyway, the engine's growl dropping to a low purr. Before he could think too hard about it, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small roll of bills he kept there. Emergency money, he called it, though emergencies for him usually involved gas stations and dive bars. His rough fingers peeled off a few bills. Pulling up alongside them, Hank leaned over and dropped the money into their cup. The bills fluttered down, landing softly among the sparse change at the bottom. The woman raised her head slowly, and their eyes met. The weariness in her gaze hit him like a physical blow. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and lines of worry creased her forehead. But there was something else there, too. A quiet strength, a determination that reminded him of someone. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Hank felt something shift inside him. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years bubbled up. Guilt, sharp and unexpected. It pierced through the careful armor he'd built around himself, making his chest tight and his stomach queasy. The boys stirred, looking up at him with identical expressions of cautious hope. Their faces were thin but clean, their eyes too old for their young faces. One of them whispered something to his brother, and they all huddled closer to their mother. Hank's hands clenched on the handlebars. The guilt twisted deeper, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he should do more, that he should say something. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. The woman's tired eyes stayed fixed on his face, and in that moment, Hank felt exposed, as if she could see right through his tough exterior to the broken man beneath. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The low rumble of Hank's motorcycle engine filled the evening air as he prepared to pull away from the curb. But before he could twist the throttle, the woman's voice cut through the noise. "You don't remember me, do you?" Her words stopped him cold. Hank's weathered hands tightened on the handlebars as he looked back at her. The streetlight above cast harsh shadows across her face. But there was something familiar in those tired eyes. "Should I?" His voice came out gruffer than he meant it to. The woman stood slowly, her movements careful as she kept one hand on the smallest Triplet's shoulder. "I'm Lena. I was married to Tommy Martinez." The name hit Hank like a physical blow. Tommy Martinez. Images flashed through his mind. Younger days, darker days, when the roar of motorcycles and the clash of fists filled his world. Tommy had been one of their mechanics, quiet and skilled with his hands, always staying clear of the worst trouble. "Tommy's wife," Hank managed, his throat suddenly dry. The three boys huddled closer to their mother, watching him with wide eyes that looked just like their father's. Lena nodded, pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself. "Yes, though that was before. Tommy's gone now. It's just been me and the boys since the accident." Hank switched off his bike's engine, the sudden silence heavy between them. The memories of Tommy, always with a wrench in, his hand and a kind word for everyone, made his chest ache. "I didn't know. About Tommy, I mean. When did—" "2 years ago," Lena said, her voice steady but tired. "The boys were 4. We were doing okay at first, but then I lost my job and things just—" She gestured helplessly at their current situation on the street. The triplets pressed closer to their mother, their small faces serious and too old for their years. Hank could see it now. Tommy's features echoed in each of them, from their dark eyes to the set of their jaws. "Are you really okay out here?" Hank asked, scanning the darkening street. He knew better than most what kind of dangers lurked in the shadows. "It's not safe, especially with kids." Lena's shoulders stiffened. "We manage. We have to." Her voice held a mix of pride and desperation that made Hank's stomach twist. "Listen," he started, but the words felt clumsy in his mouth. "How do you offer help to the widow of a man you once knew when your own past was filled with so much darkness?" The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and one of the boys coughing softly. Hank saw Lena's hand move to rub the child's back automatically, a mother's instinct that never rested. That night, sleep eluded Hank. He tossed and turned in his small apartment, Tommy Martinez's face haunting his thoughts. Morning found him sitting at his kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee between his hands, trying to make sense of the previous evening's encounter. The sight of those 3 innocent faces, mirror images of their father, wouldn't leave him. Neither would the memory of Lena's proud but weary stance, or the way she held herself together despite everything. Tommy had been one of the good ones, a man who'd kept his hands clean even when surrounded by dirt. And now his family was on the street. The morning sun cast long shadows across Hank's bedroom as he sat on the edge of his bed, running his weathered hands through his gray hair. He hadn't slept well. The image of Lena and those 3 young boys kept playing in his mind like a broken record. His small apartment felt emptier than usual. The walls, decorated with old motorcycle photos and memories of his past life, seemed to mock him. Hank pulled on his leather jacket, its familiar weight doing little to comfort him. "What are you doing, old man?" he muttered to himself, grabbing his keys. He'd never gone back to check on someone before. That wasn't his style. But something about those kids' faces, and the way Lena had looked at him. The drive back to the spot took only 15 minutes. Hank's Harley rumbled beneath him, a sound that usually brought him peace. Today, it just added to his nervousness. He kept replaying yesterday's conversation in his head, trying to piece together why it bothered him so much. As he turned onto the street where he'd seen them, his heart began to race. The sidewalk stretched out before him, gray and empty. Hank slowed, his bike scanning the area. The morning crowd hurried past, clutching coffee cups and checking phones, but there was no sign of Lena or the triplets. He parked his motorcycle and walked to the exact spot where they'd been. Their absence hit him harder than he expected. Only their cardboard sign remained, its edges curled from use, propped against the building wall. Hank picked it up, running his thumb over the desperate words written in black marker. "Hungry and homeless. Anything helps." The sign felt heavy in his hands. A cold knot formed in his stomach as he looked up and down the street. Where would a woman and 3 young boys go? The morning air felt chillier than before. Hank approached a nearby coffee shop, the sign still in his hand. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door. The young barista looked up, her smile faltering slightly at his intimidating appearance. "Excuse me." His gruff voice softened. "Have you seen a woman with 3 little boys? They were sitting outside, yesterday." The barista shook her head. "Sorry, sir. I just started my shift." Hank nodded and stepped back outside. He spent the next hour walking the surrounding blocks, checking alleyways and asking shopkeepers if they'd seen anything. No one had any answers. That night, sleep eluded him again. The next morning, he returned. And the next. And the next. Each time the empty sidewalk greeted him, mocking his growing concern. He found himself driving different routes through town, scanning faces in crowds, looking for 3 identical little boys and their tired mother. By the 4th day, Hank realized something had changed within him. The protective instinct he'd buried years ago had awakened. His thoughts kept drifting to worst-case scenarios. Lena and the boys huddled in some dangerous place, hungry and cold. Or worse. The worn sign sat on his kitchen table now, a constant reminder of his failure to act sooner. Each morning, he'd touch it before heading out to search again, like a talisman that might lead him to them. The hardened ex-biker who never looked back, who never got involved, found himself consumed with finding a woman and 3 kids he barely knew. Hank pulled his motorcycle into the parking lot of the Sunset Grove Motel, if you could even call it that anymore. The neon sign flickered weakly, missing several letters, and the once white walls had faded to a dirty gray. After 3 days of asking around town, showing Lena's photo to shopkeepers and street vendors, he'd finally tracked her down to this place. Room 112's door was weathered and peeling. Hank stood there for a moment, his large frame casting a shadow in the afternoon sun. He knocked, softer than usual, mindful of possibly sleeping children. The door opened just a crack, held by a safety chain. Lena's tired face appeared in the gap. Her eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with caution. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I asked around," Hanky said, shifting his weight. "Been worried since you disappeared from that street corner." Lena studied him for a long moment, then closed the door. He heard the chain sliding, and the door opened fully. Inside, the small room was neat despite its shabbiness. 3 identical boys sat on one of the 2 beds, watching cartoons on an old TV. They turned to look at him with matching curious expressions. "Boys," Lena said quietly. "This is Mr. O'Reilly. He's an old friend." The triplets nodded politely, but quickly returned their attention to the TV. Lena gestured to 2 plastic chairs near a small table by the window. "We can talk here," she said, sitting down. "They're distracted enough not to listen." Hank lowered himself into the other chair, which creaked under his weight. Up close, he could see the dark circles under Lena's eyes, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame. "What happened?" he asked simply. Lena's hands twisted together in her lap. "Tom? My husband. He was driving. Home from work one night. It was raining. The truck in front of him lost control and—" She swallowed hard. The boys were only 4. Hank's chest tightened. He remembered Tom, a quiet guy who'd done some mechanical work for the club years ago. "I had some savings," Lena continued, her voice steady but quiet. It lasted a while, but with 3 growing boys. She glanced at the triplets. Daycare costs more than I could make at most jobs, and when you're trying to watch 3 6-year-olds, working from home isn't really an option. She brushed at her eyes quickly. The landlord was patient for a while, but eventually, well, you saw where we ended up. And now you're here, Hank said, looking around the dingy room. It's temporary, Lena said quickly, lifting her chin. Just until I figure something out. The boys are good kids. They understand we have to be careful with money. They never complain. Hank watched as one of the triplets laughed at something on TV, the sound pure and innocent. The other 2 joined in, their giggles filling the small room. Let me help, Hank found himself saying, surprising even himself. He'd never been one to get involved in other people's problems, but something about this situation, about these kids, wouldn't let him walk away. Lena's face hardened slightly. I don't want charity, Mr. O'Reilly. Not charity, Hank said quickly, though he wasn't sure what exactly he was offering. He just knew he couldn't leave them here in this place, with its paper-thin walls and mysterious stains on the carpet. The fluorescent lights of Joe's diner buzzed overhead as Hank led Lena and the triplets through the glass door. A small bell chimed, announcing their arrival. The boys stayed close to their mother, their small hands gripping her worn jacket. Pick any booth you like, Hank said, his gruff voice softer than usual. Lena guided the boys to a corner booth, away from the few other customers. The red vinyl seats squeaked as they slid. In, the triplets huddling together on one side, while Lena sat opposite them. Hank pulled up a chair at the end of the table. A waitress with graying hair approached, setting down 5 menus. Welcome to Joe's. Can I start you folks with something to drink? Hot chocolate, Lena whispered to the boys, who nodded eagerly. Their eyes lit up at the prospect of a treat. 3 hot chocolates, Hank said, and coffee for me. He glanced at Lena. What would you like? Coffee's fine, she said, her fingers nervously smoothing the laminated menu. As the waitress walked away, Hank studied the boys. In the diner's bright light, he could see how their clothes hung loose on their small frames. Their faces were clean but tired, dark circles under their eyes that no child should have. You can order whatever you want, Hank said, addressing all of them but looking at Lena. Don't worry about the price. The triplets looked to their mother for permission. Lena nodded, and they began pointing at pictures of burgers and fries with quiet excitement. Which one of you is which? Hank asked, trying to break the ice. I'm Zane, said the boy closest to the wall. That's Eli and that's Luke. Each boy gave a tiny wave as he was introduced. The waitress returned with their drinks, setting down the hot chocolates topped with whipped cream. The boys' eyes widened, but they waited until their mother nodded before taking their first sips. After they ordered cheeseburgers for the boys, a chicken sandwich for Lena, and meatloaf for Hank, an awkward silence fell over the table. Hank cleared his throat. Listen, Lena, he began, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. I know some people. I could make some calls, try to find you folks a proper place to stay. Lena stiffened, her shoulders tensing. We don't need charity. It's not charity, Hank said quickly. It's... He paused, searching for the right words. It's just helping out family of an old friend. The triplets watched this exchange silently, their eyes moving between the adults like they were following a tennis match. A glob of whipped cream clung to Luke's nose. Lena dabbed at her son's face with a napkin, using the moment to collect her thoughts. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but just think about it, Hank interrupted. There are some decent shelters, places that could help you get back on your feet. Maybe even help with job training. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. The boy's eyes grew wide at the sight of the large burgers, but they waited politely for everyone to be served before picking up their food. Watching them eat, Hank felt something shift inside him. These kids deserved better than the streets, better than scraps and uncertainty. He'd done plenty of wrong in his life. Maybe this was a chance to do something right. "At least let me make some calls," he said softly. "No commitments, just options." Lena looked at her boys, then back at Hank. Something in her expression softened. "Options," she repeated, nodding slowly. "We could listen to options." Hank felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even as another settled in its place, the responsibility of following through. He'd made a promise now, even if not in words. Looking at the family eating their first proper meal in who knew how long, he knew he'd made the right choice. Still, a nagging voice in the back of his mind wondered if he was getting in over his head. Hank sat in his dimly lit apartment, a cup of cold coffee untouched on the table beside him. The evening shadows stretched across the worn carpet as his mind wandered back through the years. The weight of his past pressed down on his broad shoulders like a heavy leather jacket. He could see himself clearly, 20 years younger, leading a pack of roaring motorcycles down endless highways. The memory of his younger self made him wince. Back then, his leather vest had been adorned with patches that commanded respect and fear. His fists had been quick to rise, his words sharp as broken glass. "Thunder's coming through!" That's what they used to shout when he rolled into town. The nickname had suited him. Destructive, loud, and unstoppable. People scattered when they heard the rumble of engines, mothers pulling their children inside, shop owners locking their doors. Hank rubbed his weathered face with calloused hands. "What a fool I was," he muttered to the empty room. The memories kept flowing, each one darker than the last. Bar fights that left men broken, protection rackets that destroyed small businesses, deals that ruined lives. He remembered the day they'd cornered a rival gang member in an alley. The man had begged for mercy, showing them a picture of his family. Hank had laughed then, cold and cruel. "Should have thought about them before crossing Thunder O'Reilly." The coffee cup trembled in his grip as another memory surfaced. A warehouse meeting gone wrong. Someone had ended up in the hospital. Someone else never made it home. All because Hank Thunder O'Reilly had to prove he was the toughest, the meanest, the one in control. And now here was Lena, whose husband had gotten tangled up in his web of violence all those years ago. Her tired eyes and worn clothes were partly his doing, even if indirectly. Those 3 innocent boys, sleeping on motel beds instead of in a proper home. They were paying for his sins too. Hank stood up abruptly, pacing the small apartment. The streetlight outside cast his shadow on the wall, tall and imposing like his former self. But now that shadow felt like a reminder of everything he'd done wrong. "God," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've ruined so many lives." He thought of Lena's triplets, Zane, Eli, and Luke, their small faces at dinner, lighting up at the sight of hot food, how they huddled close to their mother, protecting each other in their own innocent way. They reminded him of all the families he'd hurt, all the children who'd grown up without fathers because of his actions. Regret hit him like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, his large frame seeming to shrink under the weight of his past deeds. This wasn't just about helping a woman and her kids anymore. This was about making something right in a life full of wrongs. The wall clock ticked away the hours as Hank sat there, lost in his dark memories. When morning finally came, streaking the sky with pink and gold, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to build a better future. Reaching for his phone, Hank dialed Lena's motel room number. His voice was gruff but gentle when she answered. "Hey, it's Hank. Listen, about your living situation. I think I might be able to help." The small 2-bedroom apartment wasn't much to look at, with its worn carpet and faded wallpaper, but to Lena and her boys, it might as well have been a palace. Hank stood in the doorway, his leather jacket creaking as he shifted his weight, watching the triplets dash from room to room. "This one's mine," Zane called out, his sneakers pattering against the floor. "No way, we're sharing," Eli reminded him, trailing close behind. Luke, the quietest of the three, simply ran his hand along the wall as he explored, a small smile playing on his face. Lena stood beside Hank, clutching her purse tightly. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How did you convince the landlord to rent to us?" Hank cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "Let's just say I know people who know people. The important thing is you've got a roof over your heads now." The apartment was sparsely furnished with second-hand pieces Hank had collected over the past few days. A worn but clean couch, a small dining table with 4 chairs, and basic bedroom furniture. The walls were bare, but the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows gave the space a warm, hopeful feeling. "Mama, look!" Luke called out, pointing to the small kitchen. "We have a real stove!" Lena's eyes welled up with tears. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, but Hank noticed. He'd seen plenty of tears in his life, usually caused by him, but these were different. These were tears of relief, of a weight finally being lifted. The boys continued their exploration, their excited chatter echoing through the empty spaces. Eli discovered the closet in the bedroom and announced they could use it as a fort. Zane was already planning where they would do their homework, while Luke had found a window seat in the living room and claimed it as his reading spot. Hank watched it all from his position by the door, his weathered face softening almost imperceptibly. The scene before him was so far removed from his past life, the violence, the chaos, the darkness. Here, in this modest apartment, he was witnessing something pure and good taking root. "The first month's rent is covered," he said gruffly, keeping his eyes fixed on the boys. "And I put down the security deposit. There's some grocery money in the kitchen drawer." Lena started to protest, but Hank held up his hand. "Don't. Just get these boys settled, okay?" She nodded, understanding that his help wasn't just about money. It was about redemption, for both of them. The triplets came running back, their initial exploration complete. Their faces were flushed with excitement, eyes bright with possibility. Even in their worn clothes, they looked different somehow, more alive, more like children should look. "Thank you, Mr. Hank," they said in near-perfect unison, something that still unnerved him a little. Hank nodded, taking a step back toward the door. He watched as Lena gathered her boys close, their small family unit complete and whole in their new space. The sight stirred something in his chest, pride mixed with an old, familiar ache. He'd helped create this moment, but he felt like an outsider looking in, which was exactly as it should be. He turned and walked out onto the landing, the sound of children's laughter following him down the stairs. From the parking lot, he looked up at their window, where Luke had already settled into his reading nook. The boy waved, and Hank raised his hand in response before getting on his motorcycle. Hank stood in the doorway of Lena's new apartment, watching as the triplets played with their few toys on the worn carpet. The afternoon sun filtered through thin curtains, casting long shadows across the room. A gentle smile crossed his weathered face as he observed Zane sharing his toy car with Luke, while Eli carefully stacked building blocks. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of heavy boots climbing the stairs outside. Hank's muscles tensed instinctively. He knew those footsteps. The door hadn't even closed behind him yet when Charlie Big Wheels McGrath's massive frame filled the hallway. Well, Charlie drawled, his leather vest creaking as he crossed his arms. Looks like the rumors are true. Thunder O'Reilly's gone soft. Lena quickly gathered the boys closer to her, her face pale but determined. Hank stepped between them and Charlie, his jaw clenched tight. What do you want, Charlie? Hank's voice was low, controlled, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Charlie's eyes darted around the small apartment, taking in the sparse furnishings and the frightened faces of the triplets. Just checking up on an old friend. Word gets around, you know. People talk when someone like you starts playing guardian angel. This isn't any of your business, Hank said firmly, moving closer to Charlie, trying to block his view of Lena and the boys. Charlie's laugh was harsh, echoing off the bare walls. Everything's our business, Thunder. Or did you forget how things work? He lowered his voice, leaning in close. You can't just walk away from who you are. These people? I gestured towards Lena and the triplets. They're gonna get hurt when your past comes calling. And it will come calling. Hank felt his hands curl into fists, but he kept them at his sides. The triplets were watching, and he wouldn't let them see violence in their new home. Times change, Charlie. People change. Hank squared his shoulders, drawing himself up to his full height. I'm not that man anymore. That's where you're wrong, Charlie sneered. You'll always be that man, and helping these people, it's gonna bring nothing but trouble. He jabbed a finger into Hank's chest. Mark my words. Despite Hank's outward calm, doubt began to creep in like a cold draft. Charlie's words hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. I think you should leave, Hank said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. Charlie held his gaze for a long moment before stepping back. Have it your way, Thunder. But don't say I didn't warn you. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. Nice. Place you got here, ma'am? He called to Lena, his voice dripping with false sweetness. Be a shame if anything happened to it. After Charlie's heavy footsteps faded away, Hank closed the door and turned to face Lena. She stood with her arms around the triplets, her face a mix of fear and determination. I'm sorry about that, Hank said quietly, running a hand through his graying hair. Charlie's all talk. But even as he spoke the words, Hank felt the weight of his past pressing down on him. He'd tried to leave that life behind, but Charlie was right about one thing. The past had a way of following you. Lena met his eyes across the room, and he could see she understood more than she was letting on. The triplets huddled closer to their mother, their earlier playfulness replaced by uncertainty. Hank sat in his truck outside Lena's new apartment, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel. The evening sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and through the window, he could see the triplets playing with some second-hand toys he'd brought them yesterday. Their laughter, muffled by the glass, made his chest tighten. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a heavy chain. Every smile from those boys, every grateful look from Lena, it all felt like more than he deserved. His mind wandered back to years ago, to conversations in smoke-filled rooms, to decisions made without thinking about the consequences, to Lena's husband. He got out of his truck slowly, his boots scuffing against the asphalt. The guilt had been building for days now, making it harder to look Lena in the eye. As he approached the apartment door, Zane spotted him through the window and waved excitedly. The boy's innocent gesture only made Hank's heart heavier. Lena opened the door before he could knock. The boys have been waiting for you, she said with a tired smile. They wanted to show you their new drawing. Inside, the apartment was modest but clean. The boys had spread, their art supplies across the small coffee table, proud masterpieces taped to the wall. Eli and Luke rushed to show Hank their latest creation, a crayon drawing of what looked like a motorcycle. "It's you," Luke explained, pointing at the stick figure atop the bike. Hank's throat felt tight. He couldn't take it anymore. This kindness, this trust they placed in him. He turned to Lena. "Can we talk? Alone?" Lena nodded, sending the boys to their room with gentle instructions to clean up their toys. Once they were gone, she sat down on the worn couch, concern evident in her eyes. "I need to tell you something," Hank started, his voice rough. He remained standing, too restless to sit. "About your husband, about what happened back then." "Hank," Lena began, but he held up his hand. "Please, I need to say this." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "I was part of it all. The people he got mixed up with, the dangerous jobs. I recruited him, showed him the ropes. If I hadn't—" His voice cracked. "If I hadn't brought him into that life, you wouldn't be here now. Those boys would have their father." Lena was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Is that what's been eating at you?" Hank nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "Everything you've been through, living on the streets, struggling to feed your kids, it's on me. I can try to help now, but I can't undo what I did." "No," Lena said firmly. "You can't undo it. None of us can." She stood up and walked over to him. "But what you're doing now, taking us off the street, helping us start over, that matters, Hank. That's enough." "How can it be enough?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because it has to be," she replied simply. "We can't change the past. But you're here now, helping us build a future. The boys adore you, and I—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm grateful for what you're doing. That's what matters now." From the other room, they could hear the boys chattering as they picked up their toys. The sound seemed to punctuate Lena's words, a reminder of the present moment, of what was real and important now. Hank felt some of the crushing weight lift from his shoulders. Not all of it. Maybe it would never all go away. But enough to breathe a little easier. "Thank you," he said quietly. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Lena's ancient Toyota made its final protest. Steam billowed from under the hood as she pulled to the side of the road, the triplets still half asleep in the back seat. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "Mommy?" Zane's small voice came from the back. "Are we going to be late?" Lena closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "It's okay, sweetie. The car's just feeling a little sick today." She'd barely made it through her first week at the new job at the grocery store. The manager had been understanding about her situation, but understanding only went so far. Without reliable transportation, she couldn't guarantee she'd make it to her shifts on time. After calling a tow truck she couldn't afford, and getting the boys to their daycare late, Lena arrived at work 2 hours behind schedule. Her manager, Mrs. Peterson, stood at the entrance with arms crossed. "I'm so sorry," Lena started, but Mrs. Peterson held up a hand. "Lena, we talked about this. We need someone dependable." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Please, I can make up the hours. I just need—" "I'm sorry, but we'll have to let you go." Later that afternoon, Hank found her sitting on the steps outside her apartment, head in her hands. The triplets were playing quietly nearby, sharing a single toy car between them. "Rough day?" he asked, lowering himself onto the step beside her. Lena wiped her eyes quickly. "The car broke down. Lost my job." Hank nodded slowly, watching the boys. "Mechanic take a look at it yet?" "Can't afford it." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can barely afford food. This week." "I can help with that," Hank said, reaching for his wallet. Let me— No. Lena's voice was sharp. She stood up suddenly, her face flushed. I don't need your charity, Hank. I've managed on my own before. This isn't charity, Hank insisted, his gruff voice softening. It's a loan. You can pay me back when you're back on your feet. And what if I can't? Lena's eyes flashed. What if I'm never back on my feet? Then I'll just owe you forever, right? The triplets stopped playing, looking up at their mother's raised voice. Eli's lower lip trembled. That's not what this is about, Hank said, keeping his voice steady. You've got 3 boys depending on you. Sometimes pride's got to take a backseat to practicality. My pride is all I have left, Lena shot back. It's the only thing that's kept me going. You don't understand what it's like, having to choose between feeding your kids and paying rent, having to smile and tell them everything's okay when you don't know where your next meal is coming from. Hank stood there, his weathered face etched with concern. You're right. I don't understand. But I do understand wanting to help someone who needs it. I don't need your help, Lena insisted, but her voice cracked. She turned away, wiping fresh tears. Please, just go. Hank looked at the triplets, who had huddled together, their eyes wide with worry. Then back at Lena's trembling shoulders. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his heavy boots scuffing against the concrete. Behind him, he heard one of the boys ask, Mommy, why are you crying? The sound of their mother's muffled sobs followed him down the street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Hank walked out of the auto parts store. He'd been looking for replacement parts for Lena's old car, hoping to fix it himself and save her some money. As he loaded the parts into his saddlebag, a familiar voice made him freeze. Well, well, if it ain't St. Thunder himself. Hank turned slowly, his jaw tightening at the sight of Joe Snake Thompson leaning against a beat-up pickup truck. Joe hadn't changed much over the years, still had that same calculating look in his eyes, that same crooked smile that never quite reached them. What do you want, Snake? Hank's voice was gruff, masking his unease. Joe pushed off from his truck and sauntered over, his boots scraping against the asphalt. Word gets around, Thunder. Heard you've been playing guardian angel to some woman and her kids. He clicked his tongue. Doesn't sound like the Hank O'Reilly I used to know. That's because I'm not him anymore. Hank turned back to his bike, trying to end the conversation. See, that's where you're wrong. Joe's voice took on a harder edge. You can't just wash away 30 years of being who you are. Some of the boys, they're not too happy about you getting soft. Hank's hand stilled on the saddlebag. I don't care what they think. Maybe you should. Joe stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because that woman and those kids, they're going to pay the price for your little redemption story. You really think you can protect them? From all of us? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Hank's fists clenched at his sides, but he fought down the familiar surge of anger. Stay away from them, Snake. They've got nothing to do with this. They've got everything to do with this now. Joe's smile widened. You made sure of that when you decided to play hero. Before Hank could respond, a car horn blared nearby. When he looked back, Joe was already walking away, calling over his shoulder, Better watch your back, Thunder, and theirs too. The next few hours passed in a blur of worry and rage. Hank drove past Lena's apartment 3 times that evening, checking for any signs of trouble. Each time he saw the triplets playing near the window, their innocent faces unaware of the danger that might be coming their way, his stomach twisted with guilt. Later that night, as he sat in his darkened living room, Joe's words echoed in his mind. He'd thought he was helping Lena and her boys, giving them a chance at a better life. But had he just painted targets on their backs instead? He remembered the look in Zane's eyes when he'd fixed his favorite toy truck, the way Eli had started saving him a seat at dinner, how little Luke would run to show him his drawings. They trusted him. Lena trusted him, and now that trust might get them hurt. Hank got up and paced the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Every instinct told him to walk away, to distance himself from Lena and the boys before his past caught up with them. But the thought of leaving them unprotected, vulnerable to the likes of Joe and his old gang members, made him sick to his stomach. He stopped at the window, staring out into the night. Joe was right about one thing. He couldn't just wash away his past. But maybe, just maybe, he could use what he'd learned in those dark years to keep Lena and the triplets safe now. Hank stood in Lena's small apartment, installing a new deadbolt on her front door. The metal-on-metal sound of his screwdriver echoed through the narrow hallway. His weathered hands worked quickly, driven by an urgency he couldn't shake. "This lock's better than the old one," he explained, his voice gruff but gentle. "No one's gonna pick this easy." He tested the door, making sure it closed smoothly. The triplets sat on the worn couch, watching him with wide eyes. They'd grown used to his presence over the past weeks, no longer shrinking away when his large frame filled the doorway. "And these window alarms," he continued, moving to the living room windows. "They'll make enough noise to wake the whole building if anyone tries anything funny." Lena leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Hank, this is too much. You can't spend your whole life watching over us." He barely glanced up from his work. "It ain't too much. Those guys I used to run with, they ain't the forgiving type." "I'm not helpless," Lena said, her voice firm. "I've been taking care of myself and my boys long before you came along." Hank paused, holding a window sensor in his calloused hands. "I know that. But this is different. These people are your past, not mine," Lena cut in. She walked over to where he stood. "I appreciate everything you're doing, but I won't live in fear. And I won't let my boys grow up thinking they need a protector watching their every move." The triplets looked between them, sensing the tension. One of them, Tommy, clutched his worn teddy bear tighter. "You don't understand what they're capable of," Hank insisted, his voice dropping lower. Lena's eyes flashed. "Don't I? I lost my husband. I lived on the streets. I've dealt with more than you might think." She took a deep breath. "If there's trouble coming, I need to know how to handle it myself. I can't depend on you forever." Hank's shoulders slumped slightly. He set down his tools and turned to face her fully. I can't let anything happen to you or the boys. Not after everything." "Then teach me," Lena said, her voice softening. "Show me what to look out for. Help me understand what we might be dealing with. But don't try to fight my battles for me." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Hank nodded slowly. "You're right," he admitted. "Been so focused on protecting you, I forgot you're stronger than most people I know." Lena's expression softened. "We appreciate you, Hank, but this has to be a partnership, not a rescue mission." One of the triplets, Danny, piped up from the couch. "Mom's real tough. She scared away a mean dog once." A small smile tugged at Hank's mouth. "That so?" "Yeah," Lena laughed, the tension breaking. "Though I think my screaming probably scared it more than anything else." Hank picked up his tools again. "All right, how about this? I'll finish up these security measures, but then we sit down and make a plan. Together. I'll tell you everything you need to know about staying safe, and you tell me what kind of help you actually want." "Deal," Lena agreed, reaching out to shake his hand. Her grip was firm, reminding him once again that this woman had survived more than most. As Hank returned to work, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe true protection wasn't about being a shield, but about helping someone become stronger. For the first time since his past had resurfaced, he felt like they might actually have a chance at making it through this. Together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Lou's Diner as Hank stepped off his motorcycle. 3 bikes were already parked outside. He recognized them immediately. Charlie Big Wheels McGrath, Joe Snake Thompson, and Mike Crusher Davis sat inside, nursing cups of coffee at their usual corner booth. Hank's boots scraped against the cracked linoleum as he approached. The diner fell silent, save for the gentle clink of coffee cups and the sizzle of bacon on the grill. "Well, well," Charlie drawled, a smirk playing across his weathered face. "If it ain't St. Thunder himself?" Hank pulled up a chair, his jaw tight. "We need to talk." "About your little charity case?" Snake leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "The widow and her rugrats?" "I want peace," Hank said firmly. "Whatever bad blood there is between us, it's ancient history. Leave Lena and her boys out of it." Crusher let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the nearly empty diner. "Listen to him, boys. The mighty Thunder O'Reilly, begging for peace." "I'm not begging." Hank's voice was low and steady. "I'm offering you a chance to walk away clean." Charlie shook his head, clicking his tongue. "You've gone soft, Thunder. Playing daddy to some dead man's kids? That ain't you." "Maybe that's the point," Hank replied. "People change." "No," Snake cut in, his voice sharp as a razor. "People like us don't change. We just get old and weak." He leaned closer, his coffee breath hot in Hank's face. "Or maybe you forgot who you really are." Hank's fists clenched under the table, but he kept his voice steady. "I know exactly who I am." "Do you?" Charlie's smile turned cruel. "Because I remember a man who wouldn't think twice about burning down someone's whole world. Now look at you, playing guardian angel to the very people you helped destroy." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. He struggled to maintain his composure as Charlie continued. "Those kids," Charlie's voice dropped to a whisper, "living in that nice little apartment you set them up in. 2nd floor, right? Window faces east?" He pulled out his phone, showing a photo of the triplets playing in the apartment complex's small playground. "Be a shame if something happened to them." Hank's vision went red. Before he could move, Snake placed a hand on his shoulder, gripping hard enough to bruise. "You made your choice when you walked away," Charlie said, standing up. "Now you get to live with it. Those kids, that woman, they're going to pay for your betrayal." Hank's voice came out as a growl. "Touch them, and You'll what?" Crusher interrupted, standing as well. "Pray for our souls. You're not the man you used to be, Thunder, and that's going to cost them everything." The 3 men filed out of the diner, leaving Hank alone with his cold coffee and the weight of their threats. Through the window, he watched them mount their bikes and roar away, the thunder of their engines a reminder of the storm gathering on his horizon. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone to check on Lena and the boys. They were fine. For now. But Hank knew the truth in Charlie's words. His past wasn't just catching up to him. It was targeting the very people he'd sworn to protect. Looking down at his weathered hands, Hank remembered the violence they were capable of. He'd tried to leave that life behind, but now it seemed that life wasn't done with him yet. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot of Jake's Bar and Grill as Hank Thunder O'Reilly pulled up on his motorcycle. His weathered hands gripped the handlebars tightly, knuckles white with tension. The place hadn't changed much in the 20 years since he'd last been here. Same peeling paint, same neon signs flickering in the window. Inside, the familiar smell of stale beer and cigarettes hit him. 5 men sat around a table in the back, their leather jackets adorned with patches he knew all too well. Charlie Big Wheels McGrath looked up first, a smirk playing across his face. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence," Charlie called out. "The great Thunder O'Reilly himself." Hank walked steadily toward them, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He'd chosen this meeting, hoping to resolve things peacefully. The weight of his past sat heavily on his shoulders as he pulled up a chair. "We need to talk," Hank said, his voice low and steady. "This has to end." "Joe Snake." Thompson laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet bar. "End? You think you can just walk away from everything? Start playing guardian angel to some woman and her kids?" Hank's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what I'm doing. The past is the past. Leave them out of it." "See, that's where you're wrong." Charlie leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You don't get to decide when it's over. You betrayed us, Thunder. Left us hanging when things got tough. And now you think you can play hero?" The tension in the room grew thick as molasses. Hank could feel the hostility radiating from his former brothers. These were men he'd once called family, men he'd fought beside and bled with. Now they looked at him like he was nothing more than dirt beneath their boots. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Hank said firmly. "I'm telling you to back off. Lena and those boys have nothing to do with our history." A new voice cut through the air. Mickey the Rat, Davidson, sitting in the corner. "Funny thing about that," he said, pulling out his phone. "I just saw them heading into Wilson's grocery about 10 minutes ago. Sweet kids, those triplets. Be a shame if anything happened to them." Hank's blood ran cold. He hadn't told Lena about this meeting, hadn't wanted to worry her. But now she and the boys were unknowingly close by, vulnerable. "You touch them," Hank growled, rising slowly from his chair. "And I'll—" "You'll what?" Charlie interrupted, standing to match him. "Face it, Thunder. You're not the man you used to be. Gone soft, playing daddy to someone else's kids?" The other men stood too, forming a circle around Hank. The message was clear. This wasn't going to end with a handshake and peaceful resolution. "Think real careful about what you're doing," Charlie continued, his voice dripping with malice. "Those kids, that woman, they're your weakness now, and we know exactly how to hit you where it hurts." Hank's fists clenched at, his sides, every muscle in his body tensing for a fight. But he knew he couldn't risk it, not with Lena and the triplets so close by. He had to play this smart. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the door, Charlie's mocking laughter following him out. His heart pounded as he mounted his bike, knowing he had to get to Wilson's grocery before anything happened. The meeting had failed, spectacularly, and now Lena and the boys were in more danger than ever. Hank parked his motorcycle outside Joey's diner, his weathered hands gripping the handlebars a moment longer than necessary. The afternoon sun beat down on his leather jacket, but the heat wasn't what made sweat bead on his forehead. Through the large windows, he could see them, 5 of his former brothers from the gang, spread across 2 booths like they owned the place. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the glass door. The bell chimed overhead, drawing their attention. Conversation stopped. Coffee. Cups froze halfway to mouths. Snake Thompson's scarred face twisted into an ugly smirk. "Well, well, if it ain't Saint Thunder himself," Snake called out, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Hank walked straight to their table, his boots heavy on the checkered floor. The other customers seemed to shrink away, sensing the tension. A young waitress hurried to the kitchen, her order pad clutched to her chest. "This ends now," Hank said, his voice low but firm. "I'm done with the old life, and you're gonna leave Lena and those boys alone." Big Wheels McGrath let out a harsh laugh. "You don't get to make demands anymore, Thunder. You walked away, remember?" "That's right," Hank said, standing his ground. "I walked away, and I'm staying away. But if anything happens to that family—" Snake slid out of the booth, getting right in Hank's face. The smell of cigarettes and cheap whiskey rolled off him. "You'll what? Pray for us?" The first punch came fast. Snake always was quick. Hank managed to dodge, but Big Wheels was already up, grabbing him from behind. The diner erupted in screams as customers scrambled for the exits. Hank drove his elbow back, catching Big Wheels in the ribs. He broke free just as Snake came at him again. This time, the fist connected with his jaw, sending him staggering into an empty table. Coffee cups shattered on the floor. Through the ringing in his ears, Hank heard someone yell about calling the police. He spat blood onto the black and white tiles and pushed himself up. 3 more gang members had joined the fight, surrounding him. "Still think you're better than us?" Snake taunted, landing another punch to Hank's ribs. Hank fought back, his fists finding their marks more than once. Years of street fighting came back like muscle memory. But he was older now, slower, and they were out for blood. A chair crashed against his back. Pain exploded between his shoulder blades. He stumbled forward, barely staying on his feet. Through the diner's window, he caught a glimpse of red and blue lights approaching. "Cops!" someone shouted. The gang scattered like cockroaches, leaving Hank doubled over and gasping for breath. He forced himself to move, limping toward the back exit. He couldn't get caught here, not with Lena and the Triplets counting on him. He made it to his bike just as police cars pulled up to the front of the diner. His hands shook as he started the engine, but he managed to ride away, taking the long way back to make sure no one followed. Later, in the safety of his apartment, Hank checked his phone. There was a message from Lena. "We're okay. The boys are asleep. Please tell me you're all right." His whole body ached as he sank into his worn recliner. Blood had dried on his knuckles, and his ribs screamed in protest with every breath. But Lena and the Triplets were safe. That's what mattered. He'd bought them another day, at least. He texted back with trembling fingers. "I'm alive. Stay safe. Lock your doors." Then he closed his eyes, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges. The fight had only proven what he already knew. His past wasn't going to let go easily, and neither was he. Lena sat at her small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The events from earlier that day kept replaying in her mind. The shouts, the sound of fists hitting flesh, and most importantly, the way Hank had put himself between her family and danger without a second thought. The Triplets were finally asleep in their shared bedroom, exhausted from the day's stress. Their tiny faces had been so frightened during the confrontation, but Hank had made sure they stayed safe. "You should put some ice on that," Lena said softly, as Hank pressed a damp cloth to his swollen jaw. He was sitting across from her, his usually intimidating frame somehow smaller in the dim kitchen light. "I've had worse," he mumbled, wincing slightly. "What matters is you and the boys are okay." Lena studied his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the fresh bruises from the fight. But what caught her attention most was the gentle concern in his eyes, so different from the hard look she remembered from years ago. "Why are you doing all this, Hank?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Putting yourself at risk for us? Those men, they could have really hurt you." Hank set down the cloth and met her gaze. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because..." He paused, struggling with the words. "Because I've spent too many years doing the wrong thing." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of them, but of everything. Of failing my boys, of not being able to give them a good life. And now, with all this danger... Listen to me, Lena." Hank leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not failing anyone. You're the strongest person I know, keeping those boys safe and loved through everything. But I can't do it. Alone," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I've been trying so hard to be strong, to not need help, but..." "Nobody can do it all alone," Hank said. "Trust me, I learned that the hard way." Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I do trust you, Hank. That's what scares me. After everything, I never thought I'd trust anyone again, especially someone from that life. I'm not that person anymore, Hank said quietly. And I promise you, on my life, I won't let anything happen to you or those boys. I know, Lena nodded, reaching across the table to touch his bruised hand. I see it now. The way you've changed, how much you care. Those men today, they're what you used to be. But you're different now. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their words. The kitchen clock ticked softly, and somewhere in the distance, a car honked. So what do we do now? Lena asked, her voice stronger. We keep moving forward, Hank replied. One day at a time, and we do it together. Lena nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope in her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. From down the hall, one of the triplets called out in his sleep. Lena started to rise, but Hank was already on his feet. I'll check on them, he said softly. You rest. We've got a lot to figure out tomorrow. Hank sat in his small apartment, staring at his phone. His bruised knuckles ached from yesterday's fight, a stark reminder that he couldn't handle this situation alone anymore. The weight of protecting Lena and the triplets felt heavier with each passing day. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Pastor Mike, it's Hank O'Reilly. The voice on the other end was warm and welcoming. Hank, it's been too long. How are you holding up? I need your help, Mike. Remember when you helped me leave the gang life behind? Well, the past is catching up with me, but this time there's a woman and 3 young boys involved. Pastor Mike had been there for Hank during his darkest days, offering guidance when he'd finally decided to leave his violent life behind. As Hank explained the situation with Lena and the triplets, he felt some of the burden lifting from his shoulders. Bring them to the church shelter, Pastor Mike said without hesitation. We can keep them safe while you sort this out. Next, Hank called Sarah Martinez, a local police officer who'd believed in his transformation years ago. She'd helped other former gang members start fresh, and she understood the delicate balance between justice and redemption. I've got your back, Hank, Sarah assured him. We'll increase patrols around Lena's neighborhood, and I know some people who can help with legal protection if needed. As Hank made more calls, he felt something shift inside him. For years, he'd carried his guilt like armor, using it to keep people at a distance. But now, reaching out to others, he realized his journey wasn't just about protecting Lena, it was about healing himself. Later that afternoon, Hank visited Tommy "The Rock" Richardson, another former gang member who'd successfully built a new life. Tommy owned a security company now, living proof that change was possible. You're not alone in this anymore, brother, Tommy said, clapping Hank on the shoulder. My guys and I can help keep watch over the family. With each conversation, Hank's plan took shape. He needed to confront his old gang one final time, but not as the angry, violent man he used to be. This time he'd face them with support, with purpose, and with the law on his side. Back in his apartment, Hank spread out a map of the town. He marked the gang's usual haunts, potential meeting spots, and safe zones. This wasn't about revenge or violence. It was about making a clean break, about showing them that their old ways had no power over him anymore. He picked up his phone one last time and texted his supporters. Meeting tomorrow at Pastor Mike's. Time to end this. The responses came quickly, each one a reminder that he wasn't the same man who'd once led a violent gang. He was someone different now, someone who'd learned to trust, to ask for help, and to fight for what was right instead of what was easy. As the sun set, Hank looked at the photos of Lena and the triplets on his coffee table. Their smiling faces reminded him why this fight mattered. It wasn't just about protecting them. It was about showing them and himself that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that no one had to face their battles alone. Hank's weathered hands gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle as he pulled into the empty parking lot of Murphy's Bar. The neon sign flickered weakly in the early evening light, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked pavement. His old gang, 7 of them, waited for him, their bikes lined up like dark sentinels against the building's brick wall. Charlie Big Wheels. McGrath stepped forward, his leather vest creaking. "Look who finally showed up," he sneered. "The great Thunder O'Reilly playing hero for some woman and her brats." Hank dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. The weight of his years in the gang felt heavy on his shoulders, but something else was there too, a strength he'd never known before. The face of each triplet flashed through his mind, their innocent smiles giving him courage. "This ends tonight," Hank said, his voice steady. "I'm not asking for permission to leave the life. I'm telling you it's over." Joe Snake Thompson spat on the ground. "You don't get to just walk away, Thunder. You know too much, seen too much." "That's where you're wrong," Hank replied, standing his ground. "I've got people backing me now. Real people. Not thugs hiding behind leather and chrome." The first punch came from Charlie, fast and angry. Hank saw it coming. He'd known Charlie's moves for 20 years. He deflected the blow and pushed Charlie back, refusing to escalate the violence. "I'm not fighting you," Hank declared, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Not anymore." 3 more gang members moved in, but Hank stood his ground. Just then, police sirens wailed in the distance, Hank's insurance policy. He'd called in a few favors from a reformed ex-member who'd become a deputy sheriff. "You called the cops?" Snake snarled, backing away. "You really have gone soft." Hank shook his head. "No, I've gotten smart. This isn't about being tough anymore. It's about doing what's right." The gang members began to scatter as blue and red lights flashed at the edge of the lot. Charlie lingered, his face twisted with rage and something else. Maybe respect, maybe understanding. "You're really choosing them over us?" Charlie asked, his voice quieter now. "I'm choosing life over death," Hank replied. "Love over hate. It's that simple. The police cars pulled in, but they weren't needed. The Eichode battle was already won, not with fists or violence, but with the quiet strength of a man who'd finally found something worth fighting for." Charlie backed away, mounting his bike. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow. "Yes, it is," Hank said firmly. "Because if anything happens to Lena or those boys, if anyone so much as looks at them wrong, I've got enough evidence stored away to put every one of you away for life. Walk away, Charlie. Just walk away." The rumble of motorcycles filled the air as the gang departed, leaving Hank standing alone in the parking lot. Deputy Mark Johnson, his old friend from the club, approached him. "They won't be back," Mark said confidently. "You did it, Thunder. You're free." Hank watched the taillights disappear into the darkness. For the first time in decades, he felt the heavy weight of his past lifting from his shoulders. He'd faced down his demons without throwing a single punch, and he'd won. The night air felt crisp and clean in his lungs as he mounted his bike. Tomorrow, he would check on Lena and the triplets, make sure they were safe. But tonight, he'd won his freedom, not just from his old gang, but from the man he used to be. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the fresh-cut lawn of a modest 2-bedroom house on Pine Street. Hank stood beside his motorcycle, watching as Lena guided the triplets up the walkway to their new home. His weathered face softened at the sight of their excited bouncing and pointing. "Look at the tree, Mom!" Zane called out, tugging at Lena's sleeve. "Can we have a swing?" "Maybe someday," Lena replied, fumbling with the new house keys. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes sparkled with hope. The house wasn't fancy, Just a simple ranch-style home with white siding and blue shutters. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, theirs. Hank had helped Lena secure a steady job at a local diner, and with his co-signing the lease, they'd finally found a landlord willing to give them a chance. "You boys be careful with those boxes," Hank called out, as Eli and Luke attempted to carry a small container of their toys together. The boys had grown more comfortable around him over the past few weeks, no longer hiding behind their mother when he came around. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. The living room was sparsely furnished with second-hand items Hank had helped collect from local donations, but each piece was clean and sturdy. A worn but comfortable couch faced a small TV, and a round dining table stood in the corner, complete with 4 matching chairs. "I still can't believe this is real," Lena whispered, watching her boys explore their new space. "After everything..." Hank shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. "You did all the hard work, Lena. I just opened a few doors." The triplets discovered their shared bedroom, their exclamations of joy echoing through the house. The room had been painted, light blue, with 3 identical beds sporting superhero sheets, a surprise Hank had arranged the day before. "Superman!" Luke squealed, bouncing on his bed. "Batman!" Zane claimed his own space. "I got Spider-Man!" Eli hugged his pillow tight. Lena's eyes welled up with tears as she watched her son's excitement. For the first time in months, they looked like regular kids, unburdened by worry about where they'd sleep or what they'd eat. Through the kitchen window, Hank could see the small backyard. It wasn't much, just a patch of grass with an old maple tree, but it was fenced and safe. Already he could picture the boys playing there, growing stronger and happier with each passing day. "The boys need to run off some energy," Lena suggested, wiping her eyes. "Why don't you 3 go explore the backyard?" The triplets raced outside, their laughter carried on the morning breeze. They chased each other around the maple tree, their feet leaving marks in the dewy grass. "Thank you, Hank," Lena said quietly, standing beside him at the window. "Not just for the house and the job, but for believing in us when nobody else would." Hank watched the boys play, his throat tight with emotion. In their joy, he saw redemption. In their freedom to simply be children, he found his own liberation from the guilt and darkness of his past. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the triplets run and play, their laughter a healing balm for both the former biker and the once desperate mother. In this moment, both Hank and Lena knew that while the path ahead might not be perfect, it would be walked together, with hope lighting the way. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen window of Lena's new home. Hank sat at the small wooden table, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The sounds of the triplets playing in the backyard filtered through the screen door. Their laughter a melody he never thought would bring him such peace. His eyes drifted to the leather vest hanging by the door, the one he'd worn during his Hell's Angels days. It didn't carry the same weight of shame anymore. Something had shifted inside him, like ice melting after a long winter. "They sure love that swing set you put up," Lena said, joining him at the table. She looked different now, stronger, more relaxed. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. Hank nodded, watching the boys through the window. "Never thought I'd be the type to build playground equipment," he said with a slight chuckle. "But seeing them happy, it does something to you." "You've changed," Lena observed, pouring herself some coffee. "When we first met on that street corner, you looked haunted." "I was," Hank admitted, his voice gruff but gentle. "Spent decades running from who I was, what I'd done. Thought redemption was something that happened to other people." He paused, watching one of the triplets help his brother, up after a stumble. "Turns out, helping others, That's where you find it." The kitchen fell quiet, except for the tick-tock of the wall clock and distant childish giggles. Lena reached across the table and placed her hand on Hank's arm. "You know, I used to be angry. At everything. Everyone. Even after you started helping us, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Can't blame you for that," Hank replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Trust ain't exactly something I earned easy." "But you did earn it," Lena said firmly. "Not just with your words, but with every action. Every time you showed up. Every promise you kept." Hank felt something catch in his throat. He looked down at his coffee, watching the surface ripple slightly. "Your husband. What happened to him? I carried that guilt for so long. Still do some days." "The past is the past," Lena said softly. "What matters is who we choose to be now. You taught me that, Hank. By showing up when we needed someone most. By being the change you wanted to see." A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, the triplets had started a game of tag, their feet padding against the grass, their voices full of joy. "Forgiveness," Hank said finally. "It's not what I was looking for when I first saw you and the boys on that street. Didn't think I deserved it." He took a deep breath. "Still not sure I do." "Maybe that's exactly why you deserve it," Lena replied. "Because you weren't trying to earn it. You just wanted to help." The morning light grew stronger, filling the kitchen with warmth. Through the window they could see the boys building an imaginary fort under the oak tree, their faces bright with possibility. "Moving forward," Lena continued. "That's what we're all doing. The boys, me, you too, Hank. And sometimes moving forward means letting go of who we used to be." Hank nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. The weight of his past felt lighter now, transformed by the simple act of helping others. In the laughter of 3 young boys and the trust of their mother, he had found something he never knew he was searching for: peace. Hank sat on the worn wooden steps of his front porch, a cup of coffee warming his weathered hands. The autumn breeze carried the sound of children's laughter across the yard, where the triplets chased each other, their faces bright with joy. Zane led the pack, always the protective older brother, while Eli and Luke followed close behind, their sneakers kicking up fallen leaves. He took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring the peaceful moment. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, and for once, the weight of his past didn't feel so heavy on his shoulders. The leather jacket he'd worn like armor for so many years hung loosely on the porch railing, unnecessary in this gentle morning light. "Watch this, Mr. Thunder," Luke called out, attempting a cartwheel that ended in more tumble than grace. The boy popped right back up, grinning from ear to ear, grass stains on his knees. "Not bad, kid," Hank called back, his gruff voice softened by affection. "Keep practicing." Eli approached the porch, slightly out of breath. "Can you teach us how to do real cartwheels sometime?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Hank chuckled, setting his coffee mug aside. "I think your mom might be better at that than me. These old bones aren't made for flipping around anymore." From inside the house, Lena appeared at the screen door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Boys, breakfast in 10 minutes!" she called out. The smell of pancakes wafted through the morning air. Zane immediately started herding his brothers toward the house. "Race you to wash hands," he challenged, and they all scrambled inside, their thundering footsteps echoing through the house. Lena stepped out onto the porch, crossing her arms against the morning chill. "Thank you, Hank," she said softly. He looked up at her, confused. For what? For everything. For giving us a chance at a normal life. For being there. She gestured to the yard, the house, the quiet street beyond. For all of this. Hank shifted uncomfortably, still not quite used to gratitude. You did all the hard work, he said. I just helped clear the path a little. A crash from inside the house made them both turn. Mom, Eli knocked over the soap, Zane's voice carried through the screen door. I did not, came the indignant reply. Lena laughed, shaking her head. Never a dull moment, she said, turning to go back inside. You're staying for breakfast, right? Hank nodded, watching as she disappeared into the house to handle the latest crisis. The sounds of the family's morning routine drifted out to him. Boys arguing over who got to sit where, Lena's patient voice directing traffic, the clatter of plates and forks. He picked up his coffee mug again, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. The morning sun painted everything in soft gold, from the dewy grass to the scattered toys in the yard. A soccer ball lay abandoned near the flower bed he'd helped Lena plant last weekend. A bicycle, one of 3 identical ones, leaned against the garage wall, waiting for after-school adventures. This wasn't how he'd pictured his life turning out, not by a long shot. But watching the family through the window, seeing the boys jostling for position at the breakfast table while Lena served up pancakes, Hank felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. Real, honest peace. He wasn't just their protector anymore. He was part of something bigger than himself. Something good. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. The aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the small but cozy home as Lena and the triplets decorated their first Christmas tree. Colorful lights twinkled, reflecting in the boys' excited eyes as they carefully hung ornaments on the lower branches. The living room, once bare and lifeless, now radiated warmth and joy. "Look, Mr. Thunder," Zane called out to Hank, using the nickname the triplets had given him. He held up a handmade ornament, a paper snowflake with glitter sprinkled across its delicate edges. "I made this at school." Hank sat in his usual spot, an old armchair near the window, watching the scene unfold. His weathered face softened as he nodded approvingly. "That's real nice work there, kid." Eli and Luke rummaged through a box of decorations, pulling out strings of tinsel and more ornaments. Their matching sweaters, gifts from a local charity, made them look like proper Christmas elves. The sight was a far cry from the 3 tired boys Hank had first met on that street corner months ago. "Careful with those glass ones," Lena reminded them, adjusting a string of lights. She looked different now, too. Her face fuller, her eyes brighter. The constant worry lines that had creased her forehead had begun to fade. "Can we put the star on top now?" Luke asked, bouncing on his toes. Lena smiled, reaching for the gold star. "I think we need Mr. Thunder's help for that. He's taller than me." Hank stood up, his joints creaking slightly. The boys gathered around him, each holding a corner of the star as he lifted it to the top of the tree. Their small hands guided his larger ones, making sure it sat just right. "Perfect," the triplets declared in unison. Later, as they sat around the small kitchen table enjoying hot chocolate and cookies, Hank noticed how naturally they had all fallen into this moment. The boys chatted about their school day. Lena listened attentively, and occasionally they'd all laugh at some silly joke or story. "Thank you for being here today," Lena said quietly to Hank, while the boys were distracted by their treats. "It means a lot to them, to us." Hank nodded, his throat tight with emotion he wasn't used to feeling. The chrome rings on his fingers clinked against his mug as he set it down. These simple moments, watching the boys grow, seeing Lena rebuild her life, had become the most important parts of his days. The afternoon light began to fade outside, casting long shadows through the windows. Christmas music played softly from a small radio in the corner, and the tree lights twinkled steadily. The triplets had flour on their faces from helping with the cookies, and their eyes were bright with happiness. Hank watched as Lena helped the boys clean up their cups, their movements comfortable and secure in this space they now called home. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted their faces when he first met them had been replaced by something else: hope, stability, and joy. This wasn't just their first holiday in the new home. It was their first real celebration since everything had fallen apart. And as Hank sat there, surrounded by the warmth of family and belonging, he realized he had found something he never knew he needed: peace. "Mr. Thunder," Zane called out, holding up another cookie. "Want to help us make more?" Hank smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Sure thing, kid. Show me how it's done." The sound of their laughter filled the small house, drowning out the Christmas music and creating a melody all its own. Hank sat on his front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The wooden steps creaked beneath him as he shifted his weight, but the sound didn't bother him anymore. These days, even the smallest things felt different, lighter somehow. His weathered hands held a small photo album, its edges worn from years of handling. Inside were snapshots of his past life, leather-clad figures astride motorcycles, stern faces, and dangerous smiles. But for the first time in decades, looking at these images didn't stir up the usual storm of guilt and regret. A child's laughter floated over from next door, where Lena's triplets played in their yard. The sound made Hank smile, his face softening in a way that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. He watched as the boys chased each other around their new swing set, their energy seemingly endless. "Ice cream truck," one of the boys shouted, and all three came running towards the street. Hank instinctively stood up, ready to make sure they stayed safe. But Lena was already there, corralling her excited children. "Wait for me, boys," she called out, her voice carrying the warmth of security and happiness, so different from when he'd first met her on that street corner. Hank looked down at the photo album one last time. The man in those pictures seemed like a stranger now. Without ceremony, he walked to his garbage can and dropped the album inside. The weight that lifted from his shoulders was almost physical, like putting down a heavy backpack after a long journey. Inside his house, he moved through the rooms with purpose, gathering old mementos of his previous life. His leather jacket, adorned with patches and worn smooth in places, went into a donation box. The brass, knuckles he'd kept just in case, found their way into the trash. One by one, the artifacts of his past life left his possession. In his bedroom closet, he found his old riding boots, still carrying the dust of countless miles. He'd worn these during some of his darkest moments, but now they were just leather and rubber. Into the donation box they went. The last item was his old gang patch, the colors he'd once worn with such fierce pride. Hank held it in his hands, running his thumb over the embroidered edges. Then, without hesitation, he added it to the trash pile. Through his window, he could see Lena helping one of the boys with his shoelaces, while the other two devoured their ice cream cones. The sight warmed his heart in a way that his old life never could. He'd traded power for peace, fear for friendship, and found himself richer for it. Walking back outside, Hank breathed in deeply. The air seemed fresher somehow, cleaner. A neighbor waved from across the street. Something that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. He raised his hand in return, feeling the simple pleasure of being part of a community rather than apart from it. The ice cream truck's cheerful tune faded into the distance as Lena gathered her boys for dinner. She caught Hank's eye and smiled, a gesture of understanding passing between them. She knew what today meant for him, this final clearing out of his past. Hank walked to his motorcycle, now used for simple transportation rather than intimidation. He ran his hand along its gleaming chrome, appreciating how it represented not who he was, but who he'd chosen to become. The man who had terrorized these streets was gone, replaced by someone who looked out for others, who helped where he could. A profound sense of peace settled over him as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the houses. The darkness held no more demons for him, just the promise of tomorrow. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and simmering stew filled Lena's small but cozy kitchen. Hank sat at the worn wooden table, watching as she moved between the stove and counter with practiced ease. The kitchen walls, once bare, now displayed colorful drawings made by the Triplets, stick figures of their family, including a tall figure with a beard that could only be Hank. "Uncle Hank, watch this," Zane called out, carefully carrying plates to the table. His brothers, Eli and Luke, followed his lead, each bearing utensils with determined concentration. Hank's weathered face softened as he observed their careful movements. These simple moments, watching the boys help set the table, hearing their excited chatter, felt more precious than anything he'd known in his previous life. "You boys are getting really good at that," he said, his gruff voice gentle. The Triplets beamed with pride. Lena wiped her hands on her apron and brought the steaming pot to the table. The boys scrambled into their seats, their eyes bright with anticipation. The scene before him was so different from the first time he'd encountered them on that street corner, hungry and tired. Now their cheeks were full, their eyes sparkled with life, and their laughter came easily. "Remember to say grace," Lena reminded them softly, reaching for Hank's calloused hand. The touch was natural now, comfortable. The boys bowed their heads, and Eli led the prayer, his small voice clear and confident. As they ate, Hank found himself lost in thought. The leather vest that had once been his second skin hung forgotten in a closet. The thundering roar of motorcycles no longer called to him. Instead, he found peace in these quiet moments, helping with homework, fixing bikes in the garage with the boys watching in fascination, sharing meals around this table. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Lena observed, passing him a basket of rolls. "Just thinking," Hank replied, his voice thick with emotion. "About how different things are now." The Triplets had finished their meals in record time, as usual. They fidgeted in their seats, eager to show Hank something they'd made at school. At Lena's nod, they darted from the table and returned with handmade cards. "We made these for you," Luke exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. The cards spilled onto the table, paper hearts decorated with glitter, careful cursive writing practicing, "We love you, Uncle Hank," and drawings of motorcycles with stick figure riders. The sight of them made Hank's chest tight with emotion. The boys couldn't contain themselves any longer. They rushed toward him, 3 pairs of small arms wrapping around his broad shoulders in an enthusiastic group hug. Their innocent affection, so freely given, struck him deeply. "Thank you, Hank," Lena said softly from across the table, her eyes shining with grateful tears. "For everything." Looking at the family before him, Lena's gentle smile, the boys' uninhibited joy, Hank felt the last shadows of his past life fall away. This was his redemption, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the simple act of loving and being loved in return. The setting sun painted the kitchen in warm, golden light, casting long shadows across the floor. Through the window, Hank could see the small garden they'd planted together, the swing set he'd helped build, the peaceful neighborhood that had become home. He realized that in trying to save this family, they had saved him too. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.